Hello, I'm Alma Angeles. Welcome to Eagle News International.
And I'm CJ Hero. Here are tonight's headlines.
Myanmar sees its largest anti-coup protest yet, with young demonstrators spilling onto the streets to denounce the country's new military regime despite a social media crackdown aimed at stifling a growing chorus of popular dissent.
The International Criminal Court ruled Friday that it had jurisdiction over the situation in the occupied Palestinian territories, paving the way for the tribunal to open a war crimes investigation. U.S. President Joe Biden said that his predecessor Donald Trump should not receive classified intelligence briefings, as is customary for former presidents.
You've called him dangerous.
And the COVID-19 pandemic slowed down for the third week in a row, and new cases are now at their lowest level since the end of October, with new infections falling by half in South Africa, according to a specialized AFP database.
Myanmar saw its largest anti-coup protest yet today, with young demonstrators spilling onto the streets to denounce the country's new military regime despite a nationwide internet blackout aimed at stifling a growing chorus of popular dissent. Take a look. As many as 1,000 demonstrators marched on a road near Yangon University, most holding up the three-finger salute that has come to symbolize resistance to the army takeover. A large police contingent blocked nearby roads with 2 water cannon trucks parked at the scene. As protests gathered steam this week, the junta ordered telecom networks to freeze users out of access to Facebook. The platform had hosted a rapidly growing civil disobedience movement forum that had inspired civil servants, healthcare professionals, and teachers to show their dissent by boycotting their jobs in civil service and hospitals. The military widened its efforts to stifle dissent on Friday when it demanded new blocks on other social media services. Twitter, one of the targeted platforms, said the move was an attack on the rights of people to make their voices heard.
UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said a special envoy to the country had made first contact with Myanmar's deputy military commander to urge the junta to relinquish power to the civilian government it toppled. We will do everything we can to make the international community united in making sure that conditions are created for this coup to be reversed, he told reporters on Friday. State media in Myanmar reported Saturday that junta figures had spoken with diplomats the previous day to respond to an international outcry and ask them to work with the new leaders. The government understands the concerns of the international community on the continuation of Myanmar's democratic transition process, International Cooperation Minister Coco Laing said in the meeting, according to the report. The UN Security Council has so far taken a softer line, voicing deep concern, a step down from a draft Tuesday that had also condemned the putsch. Diplomats said veto-wielding China and Russia, Myanmar's main supporters at the UN, had asked for more time Tuesday to finesse the Council's response.
Meanwhile, the International Criminal Court ruled that it had jurisdiction over the situation in the occupied Palestinian territories, paving the way for the tribunal to open a war crimes investigation. Palestinian Civil Affairs Minister Hussein Al-Sheikh said in a tweet, quote, "The ICC's decision to consider Palestine as a member state according to the Treaty of Rome and the court's jurisdiction to consider Palestinian territories' issues and complaints raised by the PA, a victory for right, justice, freedom, and moral values in the world." Meanwhile, Israeli Foreign Minister Gabi Ashkenazi called the International Criminal Court a political tool of anti-Israel propaganda on Twitter after it said it had jurisdiction over the situation in occupied Palestinian territories. The ICC's ruling Friday paves the way for the tribunal's prosecutor to potentially open a war crimes investigation. Palestine is a state party to the court set up in 2002 to try the world's worst crimes, but Israel is not. Prosecutor Fatou Bensouda had asked the court for its legal opinion on whether its reach extended to areas occupied by Israel after announcing in December 2019 that she wanted to start a full probe. The ICC said in a statement it had decided by majority that the court's territorial jurisdiction in the situation in Palestine, a state party to the ICC Rome Statute, extends to the territories occupied by Israel since 1967, namely Gaza and the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. The ICC has been part of the global justice system since 2002. It has the authority to prosecute those accused of genocide, crimes against humanity, and the war crimes on the territory of states party to the Rome Statute, its founding treaty.
Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu denounces the International Criminal Court's ruling as pure anti-Semitism after it had jurisdiction over the situation in the occupied Palestinian territories. Watch this.
When the ICC investigates Israel for fake war crimes, this is pure anti-Semitism. As Prime Minister of Israel, I assure you, we will fight this perversion of justice with all our might. Outrageously claims that when Jews live in our homeland, this is a war crime. Second, it claims that when democratic Israel defends itself against terrorists who murder our children, rocket our cities, we're committing another war crime. The court established to prevent atrocities like the Nazi Holocaust against the Jewish people is now targeting the one state of the Jewish people.
Human Rights Watch, however, said the ruling was pivotal, adding that it was high time that Israeli and Palestinian perpetrators of the gravest abuses should face justice. The U.S. State Department said Israel should not be bound by the court as it was not a member. State Department spokesman Ned Price said, "We have serious concerns about the ICC's attempts to exercise jurisdiction over Israeli personnel. We have always taken the position that the court's jurisdiction should be reserved for countries that consent to it or are referred by the UN Council or the UN Security Council."
In other news, U.S. President Joe Biden said that his predecessor, Donald Trump, who is awaiting a Senate impeachment trial on charges of inciting an attack on the U.S. Capitol, should not receive classified intelligence briefings, as is customary for former presidents. Let's take a listen.
President, should former President Trump still receive intelligence briefings?
I think not.
Why not?
Because of his erratic behavior unrelated to the insurrection.
I mean, you've called him an existential threat. You've called him dangerous. You've called him reckless.
Yeah, I have, and I believe it.
What's your worst fear if he continues to get these intelligence briefings?
I'd rather not speculate out loud. I just think that there is no need for him to have that intelligence briefing. What value is giving him an intelligence briefing? What impact does he have at all, other than the fact he might slip and say something?
Let's turn to the impeachment trial. President Trump's impeachment trial. If you were still a senator, would you vote to convict him?
Look, I ran like hell to defeat him because I thought he was unfit to be president. I've watched what everybody else watched, what happened when that crew invaded the United States Congress. But I'm not in the Senate now. I'll let the Senate make that decision.
While in the White House, Trump repeatedly triggered concern over his use or dismissal of intelligence. In May 2017, he reportedly shared classified information in a meeting with Russia's foreign minister and ambassador that U.S. intelligence believed put an ally's assets at risk. Trump also publicly questioned U.S. intelligence findings that Russia intervened in the 2016 election and carried out a massive hacking operation late in his term. Former presidents are traditionally entitled to intelligence briefings, but many Trump critics have voiced fears that he is a loose cannon who may let slip information vital to national security.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken pressed Beijing on its treatment of Uyghurs, Tibetans, and Hong Kong, while China defended its policies in the first conversation between top officials of the two powers since President Joe Biden took office. I made clear the U.S. will defend our national interests, stand up for democratic values, and hold Beijing accountable for its abuses of the international system, Blinken said on Twitter of his call with senior Chinese official Yang Jiechi. Blinken told Yang that the United States will continue to stand up for human rights and democratic values, including in Xinjiang, Tibet, and Hong Kong, a State Department statement said of the call, which took place on Friday, Washington time. Blinken also pressed China to join the international community in condemning the military coup in Burma, it said, using the former name of Myanmar. The top U.S. diplomat said the United States would hold Beijing accountable for its efforts to threaten stability in the Indo-Pacific, including across the Taiwan Strait, and its undermining of the rules-based international system. Yang, however, warned on the call that Hong Kong, Xinjiang, and Tibet were China's internal affairs and no external forces are allowed to interfere, urging the United States to correct mistakes made in recent years, the Chinese embassy to the U.S. said in a statement. He also called on Washington to strictly abide by the One China principle, under which Beijing considers Taiwan an inseparable part of its territory, saying the Taiwan issue is the most important and sensitive core issue in China-U.S. relations. The tough tone comes after Blinken, in his confirmation hearing, said he would continue former President Donald Trump's approach to China in a rare point of agreement between the two administrations.
Meanwhile, the foreign ministers of Germany, France, Britain, and the United States on Friday said they wanted to revive the transatlantic relationship following their first in-depth talks since President Joe Biden took office. The German Foreign Ministry in a statement said, quote, "This first in-depth exchange between the foreign ministers since President Biden's inauguration was characterized by a trusting and constructive atmosphere." The European foreign ministers and their new U.S. counterpart, Antony Blinken, discussed the Iran nuclear deal, which has been in tatters since former President Trump pulled out of the pact in 2018. State Department spokesman Ned Price said Blinken and his counterparts affirmed the centrality of the transatlantic relationship in dealing with security, climate, economic, health, and other challenges the world faces.
Meanwhile, tens of thousands of police deployed across India on Saturday in a bid to smother threatened new protests by farmers fighting government agriculture reforms. 10 metro stations were closed in central New Delhi, where a tractor rally last month turned into a violent rampage, and thousands of police manned barricades and roadblocks at key intersections. Tens of thousands of farmers have been camping on the outskirts of Delhi since November, calling for a repeal of the reforms that free up farm produce markets. The farmers say the changes mean the crucial agriculture industry will be taken over by major conglomerates. After the troubles in the capital on January 26, farmers' unions had vowed that any new action would be peaceful. Outside of Delhi, major police deployments were ordered in the key farm states of Uttar Pradesh, Haryana, and Punjab.
In other news, Russia on Friday expelled diplomats from 3 European countries for allegedly taking part in protests in support of jailed Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny after the European Union said ties with Moscow had hit a new low. French President Emmanuel Macron and German Chancellor Angela Merkel, in a video conference, advocated a permanent and demanding discussion with Russia, despite their joint condemnation of the expulsion of European diplomats by Moscow in connection with the Navalny affair. Let's listen in.
Sur l'affaire Navalny, je l'ai dit, je condamne avec la plus grande fermeté, du début à la fin, ce qu'il s'est passé. De l'empoisonnement aux conditions terribles du retour, à la sanction et la condamnation, et aujourd'hui l'expulsion des diplomates allemands, polonais, suédois qui ont été décidés par la Russie. Je pense qu'on ne gère pas les tensions politiques, quand bien même elles sont internes, de cette manière. Et je suis solidaire avec les 3 pays qui ont eu des diplomates expulsés et je continuerai à accompagner un message clair et de fermeté à l'égard de la Russie sur ce sujet.
Certainly our relations are on the severe strain and the Navalny case is a low point in our relations.
With EU Foreign Policy Chief Joseph Borrell in Moscow for a rare visit, Russia said it had declared diplomats from Poland, Germany, and Sweden persona non grata after accusing them of attending illegal protests on January 23 in support of Navalny. The West has fiercely condemned Navalny's arrest in mid-January, a crackdown on mass demonstrations by his supporters, and a court ruling on Tuesday to jail the 44-year-old anti-corruption campaigner for nearly 3 years. Moscow announced the expulsions just hours after Borrell met with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov to discuss ties with the unspecified number of diplomats ordered to leave Russia in the near future. Russia has bristled at Western backing for Navalny, President Vladimir Putin's most prominent opponent, accusing Europe and the United States of interfering in its domestic affairs.
Meanwhile, Libyan delegates at UN-led talks outside Geneva on Friday made the surprise choice of Abdul Hamid Dbeibah as Prime Minister of a transitional unity government to take the war-ravaged country through to elections in December. He was chosen along with a 3-member presidency council to head a unity administration and steer the North African state towards the ballot box on December 24. Dbeibah, a Canadian-trained engineer from the city of Misrata and founder of the Libya Al-Mustaqbal, or Libya of the Future movement, previously led the Libyan Investment and Development Company under dictator Muammar Gaddafi. The vote is part of a complex UN process aiming to build on a fragile ceasefire and end more than a decade of conflict. Oil-rich Libya has been torn by civil war since a NATO-backed uprising led to the toppling and killing of Gaddafi in 2011. In New York, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said, "I do believe it is a breakthrough," adding it was very good news in our search for peace following a ceasefire agreement. Washington welcomed the interim officials. European powers Germany, France, Italy, and Britain joined the United States in welcoming Libya's new interim government.
In other news, veteran Canadian actor Christopher Plummer, whose decades-long career featured a star turn in the Sound of Music and an Oscar win late in life, has died, according to his manager on Friday. He was 91. Plummer died at his home in Connecticut with his wife, Elaine Taylor, at his side, according to his longtime friend and manager, Lou Pitt. Hollywood historian Levi Tinker described Plummer as a consummate stage and screen actor with a Shakespearean quality. Let's listen in.
He was the consummate stage and screen actor, and he's one of the last of that breed of actors. He has that Shakespearean quality that he was so well known for. Just very royal and regal in his performances, and you believe them in whatever role he was in, whether it was Captain Von Trapp or General Chang or an Up. you believe the role he was playing. There was very few performers who at 90 years old, 89, 90, 91 years old were still appearing on screen, and delivering such incredible performances as what he was up until the end as well, too.
Understand him, really. We don't get to know him.
Born on December 13, 1929 in Toronto, Plummer made his professional theater debut in Ottawa in The Rivals in 1950. He took to Broadway in 1954 with Star-Crossed Story and broke into film in 1958 with Stage Struck before crossing the Atlantic in the early 1960s to work in London theater. Plummer was dynamic on stage, earning praise as one of the premier Shakespearean actors to come out of North America in the 20th century. Some critics said he initially failed to project that charisma on the silver screen, but that changed with The Sound of Music, his best-known role. Now, despite its enormous worldwide success, Plummer publicly despised the film, calling his role gooey in The Hollywood Reporter in 2011. But he later softened, telling the same publication in 2015 that the production was the last bastion of peace and innocence in the very cynical time, unquote. Julie Andrews, meanwhile, his partner, called Plummer a consummate actor, adding in a statement to The Hollywood Reporter, "I treasure the memories of our work together and all the humor and fun we shared through the years." Plummer was one of the most recognizable and admired character actors in Hollywood, with some 100 films under his belt and dozens of television roles.
We don't.
And the news continues here on Eagle News. We'll be right back.
Mula noon hanggang ngayon, gabay natin ang MTRCB ratings sa matalino at responsableng panonood. Sa tamang pagsunod sa MTRCB ratings, ginagawa nating ligtas at makabuluhan ang panonood ng bawat miyembro ng pamilyang Pilipino. Lumipas man ang panahon, hanggang may pamilyang Pilipino, andyan ang MTRCB.
Factual.
We have to defeat the virus everywhere.
Timely information. Balanced, not only in the country, but also abroad.
I'm certain of one thing.
Interviews that people need to know. Watch Aguila Pilipinas! A one-hour newscast of reports coming from regional hubs in Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. Know the important updates in Asia in ASEAN in Focus. Track the latest stories in the provinces in Aguila Provincia. Tune into Mata ng Aguila, the evening primetime news program of Net25. Balanced and objective, Mata ng Aguila covers national and international issues, tackles news on business, health, science, and technology, entertainment, sports and human interest features, and current events. And Eagle News International delivers the latest global reports, impartial, accessible, and up-to-date. It brings to fore EBC's rich international scope and access to valuable information streams.
Well, thank you to thank our help outdoor.
Catch these programs on Net25. You can also watch our news programs through eaglenews.ph and Eagle News Facebook page and YouTube channel.
Well,
Welcome back to the news. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau on Friday defended Canada tapping a vaccine sharing program that pulled funds from wealthy nations to help poorer ones inoculate their populations against COVID-19 amid criticisms for being the only G7 beneficiary. Watch this.
When wealthier countries invest in COVAX, half of that funding is for doses at home, and the other half is to buy doses for low and middle-income countries. In other words, our contribution was always intended to access vaccine doses for Canadians as well as to support lower-income countries. Through COVAX, pending Health Canada approval, we will receive at least 1.9 million doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine before the end of June. That's in addition to the 20 million doses we've already secured from AstraZeneca. Canada is committed to making sure that the rest of the world doesn't get left behind when it comes to vaccination. That's why we are one of the world's top donors to COVAX. To beat this virus anywhere, we have to beat it everywhere.
The COVAX program published its first distribution list this week, breaking down who would get its initial 337.2 million doses of coronavirus vaccine. Some 145 countries are set to receive enough doses to immunize 3.3% of their collective population by mid-2021, it said. Most doses will go to lower and lower middle income economies such as India, Nigeria, and Brazil, but richer countries including Canada, New Zealand, and South Korea, who bought into the bulk purchases as backup for their own vaccine rollouts, have suddenly faced criticisms for doing so. Canadian opposition parties and anti-poverty groups such as Oxfam blasted the government for accepting vaccines needed in poorer nations.
China's drug authorities have given conditional approval for a second COVID-19 vaccine, Sinovac's CoronaVac jab. The pharmaceutical company said today the vaccine has already been rolled out to key groups at higher risk of exposure to coronavirus, but Saturday's approval allows for its use on the general public. A conditional approval helps hustle emergency drugs to market in cases when clinical trials are yet to meet normal standards, but indicate therapies will work. Sinovac said in a statement, quote, the approval comes after multiple domestic and overseas trials of the vaccine in countries including Brazil and Turkey, although efficacy and safety results need to be further confirmed. Sinovac's approval comes weeks after fellow Chinese pharmaceutical company Sinopharm received a similar conditional green light to put its vaccine on the market. Sinovac said trials in Brazil had shown around 50% efficacy in preventing infection and 80% efficacy in preventing cases requiring medical intervention.
In other news, as a second deadly wave of COVID-19 batters Latin America, images have emerged from country after country of desperate people lining up for days to buy oxygen to ease the suffering of infected loved ones fighting for breath. As demand soars, prices have skyrocketed and families have had to scrape together their last cents to pay for supplies of the essential gas. Watch this.
Oxígeno, quizás este sea, podemos decir, el lugar más barato donde encontramos el oxígeno a 20 soles el metro cúbico. Es por eso que también nos pasamos días, noches, madrugadas, y yo y mi hermano nos turnamos al venir a hacer la cola. Él duerme aquí a la intemperie del aire, en el pasto, entonces soy yo la que le tengo que traer el desayuno, el almuerzo, la cena.
On January 14 alone, a researcher estimates more than 100 people died of asphyxiation at hospitals in Brazil's northern Amazonas state. According to the World Health Organization, about 1 in 5 people with COVID-19 requires oxygen therapy to relieve respiratory distress. With more 19 million recorded infections to date, likely an undercount according to experts, this means almost 4 million people in Latin America have required oxygen therapy since the outbreak began. Public health NGO PATH, which compiles a COVID-19 oxygen needs tracker, says more than half of hospitals in low and middle-income countries, a category that includes most of Latin America, have an inconsistent supply of medical oxygen or lack it entirely.
Meanwhile, stadiums across the United States are being transformed into vaccination centers. Here, take a look. Bronx residents are getting their first dose of the COVID-19 vaccine in the famous Yankees baseball stadium in New York. The baseball ground will only vaccinate people who live in the Bronx borough, one of the poorest in the city and which has some of the highest rates of COVID-19 infections. The positivity rate in the Bronx is the highest in all of New York's 5 boroughs. It was at 6.67% Friday, double the rate in the wealthier area of Manhattan, according to New York Governor Andrew Cuomo. That is why the authorities in this traditionally Democratic bastion of the city decided to reserve the vaccinations on offer at the stadium exclusively for residents of the Bronx. Since the start of the pandemic last March, the death rate in New York's Black and Latino communities has been double that of their white counterparts. That same racial disparity has played out across the United States, where more than 453,000 people have died of the disease. Yet, these same minorities have until now received fewer vaccinations than other communities. In New York, figures released on Sunday show that among the 500,000 doses of vaccine already administered, only 15% went to Hispanic people, even though they represent 30% of the population of 8 million. And 11% went to African Americans, who make up 25% of the population.
In other news, several dozen managers of bars and cafes protest in Brussels to ask the Belgian state for financial help. Those in the hospitality sector fear an avalanche of bankruptcies as the country's COVID-19 lockdown hits them hard. Watch this.
Que l'ensemble des exploitants bruxellois sont au bord de l'agonie, n'ont plus de quoi payer, aucune des charges qui continuent à courir. Et que les aides qui sont accordées jusqu'à présent ne permettent même pas de couvrir, dans mon cas, un mois de loyer.
Protests were also held in several other cities throughout the country. Belgium's COVID measures have been officially extended until April 1st, according to the latest information from Prime Minister Alexander De Croo. According to the Brussels Times, by April 1st at the latest, Belgium also intends to have a penalty system in place for people who do not get tested, even though they have to, such as returning travelers.
Staying in Europe, Spain said it would limit the use of the AstraZeneca vaccine to people under 55, becoming the latest European nation to impose an age restriction on the Anglo-Swedish jab. The move echoes earlier decisions by a growing number of countries in Europe that have restricted the vaccine's use, despite the European Medicines Agency's green-lighting its use late last week for all adults. Last week, the German Vaccines Authority advised against using AstraZeneca's vaccine for the over 65s, judging that there was not enough data on its effectiveness in this age group. The Dutch Health Council said Thursday that the vaccine's efficacy in people aged over 55 was unclear because only a small number of that age took part in clinical trials. Spain has so far vaccinated just under 2 million people and plans to have covered 70% of its population by the summer's end, a goal reaffirmed on Wednesday by the government despite shortages and delays in vaccine supplies. Also on Wednesday, Health Minister Carolina Darea said Spain was open to the idea of using Russia's Sputnik V vaccine as long as it was approved by European regulators. Spain has been hard hit by the pandemic, recording over 61,000 deaths from nearly 3 million cases so far.
Staying in Spain, Madrid authorities on Friday confirmed the first case in the region of the Brazilian variant of coronavirus, which is feared to be particularly infectious in the region. A 44-year-old man who arrived at Madrid's airport on January 29 tested positive for the coronavirus, and subsequent lab tests confirmed he had caught the new strain, the regional government of Madrid said in a statement. The case is the first report in Spain of the variant, blamed for a disastrous surge in infections in the Brazilian city of Manaus. The announcement came 3 days after Spain restricted arrivals by air from Brazil and South Africa to curb the spread of the new virus strain. Madrid has since the end of December also restricted arrivals from Britain because of the discovery of a new virus strain there last year.
The World Health Organization called on vaccine makers to dramatically boost production as U.S. President Joe Biden warned the economic fallout from the coronavirus pandemic was pushing the U.S. towards breaking point. WHO Chief Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus told reporters that while the number of COVID-19 vaccines administered, which is 115 million, had now overtaken the number of infections worldwide, more than 3/4 of the jabs had been handed out in just 10 wealthy countries. Let's listen in.
Problem sometimes. Globally, the number of vaccinations has now overtaken the number of reported infections. In one sense, that's good news and a remarkable achievement in such a short time frame. But more than 3/4 of those vaccinations are in just 10 countries that account for almost 60% of global GDP. Almost 130 countries with 2.5 billion people are yet to administer a single dose. Some countries have already vaccinated large proportions of their population who are at lower risk of severe disease or death. All governments have an obligation to protect their own people. But once countries with vaccines have vaccinated their own health workers and older people, the best way to protect the rest of their own population is to share vaccines so other countries can do the same. On Wednesday, COVAX published its forecast for the distribution of vaccines to participating countries. This is a very exciting moment. Countries are ready to go, but the vaccines aren't there. We need countries to share doses once they have finished vaccinating health workers and older people. But we also need a massive scale-up in production. Last week, Sanofi announced it would make its manufacturing infrastructure available to support production of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. We call on other companies to follow this example.
Talked about, are we turning the corner? Well, the problem sometimes with corners is you don't see what's around that corner. This virus still has a huge amount of energy. It is a massive force of infection still associated with this virus. This is like a flood with water. And just because the flood waters have dropped an inch or two, it doesn't mean the flood's going to go away because it's still raining upstream. From our perspective, communities around the world deserve huge credit. For the last number of weeks, compliance and buy-in and participation from communities in lockdowns and stay-at-home orders and wearing masks and in avoiding crowded places, that's what's pushed the virus down. The virus isn't going away by itself, and it won't. It will go away when we put it away.
Meanwhile, the wealthy monarchies of the Gulf are intensifying coronavirus containment measures as cases jump, compounding the economic woes caused by slumping oil revenues, which are the region's lifeblood. After months of steadily declining infections last year, the Gulf has seen a sharp uptick in 2021, and cases across the six-nation Gulf Cooperation Council bloc rose 6.6% in the past 7 days. Saudi Arabia on Thursday shut down entertainment centers, including cinemas, and suspended dine-in services at restaurants shortly after banning travel from 20 countries flagged as high risk. Qatar this week tightened rules on indoor social and sporting gatherings while slashing the number of customers permitted in hospitality settings as a closely watched FIFA tournament of the world's leading football clubs begins. Kuwait on Wednesday banned non-citizens from entering the country for a period of 2 weeks and cut opening hours for non-essential retail stores. In Dubai, seen as a playground for the rich and famous escaping their own country's lockdowns in recent months, popular weekend brunches offered at many hotels have reportedly been canceled. Qatar, which has lagged behind other Gulf countries in its vaccination drive, has seen a sharp spike in cases in the past week, up almost a third, and with hospitalizations 85% higher in January compared to the month before. Its new measures reduce the permitted number of customers in commercial settings rather than mandating the closure of any sector of the economy. Restaurants and cafes that have not been certified as compliant with an official sanitation scheme will see their capacity reduced to 15%.
Now, the COVID-19 pandemic also slowed down for the third week in a row, and new cases are now at their lowest level since the end of October, with new infections falling by half in South Africa, according to a specialized AFP database. The number of new daily cases dipped below the 500,000 mark for the first time since late October, standing at 493,000, according to an AFP tally to Thursday. Now, new infections dropped by 13% over the week after reaching a record 725,000 in mid-January. Nearly every area of the world saw a slackening off, with new cases decreasing in Africa by 27%, by 17% in the United States and Canada, by 12% in Europe and Latin America, and the Caribbean by 2% in Asia. The number of new cases picked up slightly by 4% in the Middle East, however, while there were only 14 cases per day, or 43% more in the Oceania region.
Eagle News will be right back. Please don't go away.
Mula noon hanggang ngayon, gabay natin ang MTRCB ratings sa matalino at responsableng panonood. Sa tamang pagsunod sa MTRCB ratings, ginagawa nating ligtas at makabuluhan ang panonood ng bawat miyembro ng pamilyang Pilipino. Lumipas man ang panahon, hanggang may pamilyang Pilipino, andyan ang MTRCB.
Aquino here at Hatley Castle, one of the filming locations for the X-Men series. Don't forget to tune in to Digital Nest only on Net25.
Ayos ka dyan, nagigigil na ako sa'yo.
Bakit ganito TV natin? May snow.
Tahimik na kayo. Ay, Kapitan! Nakikita kita. Madalas mong kausap si Teacher Jennifer. Ay! Ayoko na nga po mag-aral, Teacher Jenny! Hindi! Kailangan mo mag-online class! Hoy!
Sumaya tayong lahat. Kay saya-saya.
Innovation, digital disruption, globalization. Startups, micro, small, and medium enterprises, as well as large corporations, all face interesting challenges in the market today. Peek into the world of exciting opportunities and partnerships to drive growth with the latest business news and information. We are open for business. Join the conversations to create a more vibrant environment for entrepreneurship. Catch Open for Business every Saturday from 5 to 6 p.m. Open for Business, from vision to action.
Welcome back to the news. Japanese tennis superstar Naomi Osaka Saturday slammed ignorant remarks from the Tokyo Olympics chief organizer after a sexism row that has triggered an angry backlash and calls for his resignation. Osaka, a leading face of the Games in her home nation, joined growing criticisms of former Japanese Prime Minister Yoshihiro Mori, 83, after he complained that women speak for too long in meetings. The gaffe-prone Mori has apologized but refused to step down and attempted to justify his comments by explaining he does not speak to women much. I feel like that was a really ignorant statement to make, said Osaka, 23, referring to the original remarks. Olympic medalists, Japanese sports officials, and Games volunteers have lined up to lambast Mori, while Tokyo's governor said she was left speechless by the remarks. Japan's Asahi Shimbun Daily, in an editorial, called for Mori's resignation, and an online campaign urging his sacking has attracted more than 112,000 signatures, including from Grammy-winning musician Ruichi Sakamoto. The row is the latest headache for organizers already battling public disquiet about the postponed Games. Polls show more than 80% of Japanese oppose holding the event this summer, with the coronavirus pandemic still raging. Mori, who has a history of controversial remarks, had already attracted criticism earlier in the week by insisting the Games would happen however the coronavirus pandemic evolves.
Scientists have identified Earth's smallest known reptile, warning at the same time that sustained destruction of forests in northern Madagascar threatens its survival. Tiny enough to perch comfortably on a fingertip, the ultra-compact chameleon dubbed Bruxia nana has the same proportions and world-weary expression as its larger cousins around the world. Frank Law, curator of the herpetology at the Bavarian State Collection of Zoology, said they discovered it in the mountains of northern Madagascar. The male's body, about the size of a peanut, was 13.5 millimeters long, half an inch, with the tail adding another 9 millimeters. By contrast, the female measured 29 millimeters from its nose to the tip of its tail. The pair remain the only specimens of the species ever found. Madagascar, in a global biodiversity hotspot, accounting for 5% of the world's unique plant and animal species.
Finally, in our news, China's Tianwen-1 probe has sent back its first image of Mars, the National Space Agency said, as the mission prepares to touch down on the red planet later this year. The spacecraft, launched in July around the same time as a rival U.S. mission, is expected to enter Mars orbit around February 10. The black and white photo released late Friday by the China National Space Administration showed geological features including the Schiaparelli crater and the Valles Marineris, a vast stretch of canyons on the Martian surface. The 5-ton Tianwen-1 includes a Mars orbiter, a lander, and a rover that will study the planet's soil. China hopes to ultimately land the rover in May in Utopia, a massive impact basin on Mars. After watching the United States and the Soviet Union lead the way during the Cold War, China has poured billions of dollars into its military-led space program. It has made huge strides in the past decade, sending a human into space in 2003. The Asian powerhouse has laid the groundwork to assemble a space station by 2022 and gain a permanent foothold in Earth orbit. But Mars has proved a challenging target so far, with most missions sent by the United States, Russia, Europe, Japan, and India to the planet since 1960, ending in failure. Tianwen-1 is not China's first attempt to reach Mars. A previous mission with Russia in 2011 ended prematurely as the launch failed. China has already sent 2 rovers to the moon. With the second, China became the first country to make a successful soft landing on the far side.
And the race for space is still on.
know.
Yes. And before we go, I would like to greet my friend here. A very happy birthday, CJ. I didn't know, but we'll have time to prepare for Monday.
I kept it secret.
Daya mo.
Surprise, everyone. Well, that's tomorrow.
Happy birthday. Yeah, tomorrow. Tomorrow's your birthday, right?
Thank you so much. Well, that's it for tonight's broadcast. Thank you so much for joining us. I am CJ Hero. Please join us again on Monday.
And at the end of the day, there remains so much more to be grateful for. I'm Alma Angeles. Happy birthday, CJ. And
we live in interesting times. Sabi
Huwag tayong mag-alala. Kung ganito man, kalala ang problema ng mundo, tandaan ninyo, meron tayong Diyos na handang-handang tumulong sa atin. Ang kailangan ay makita ng Diyos yung pagkakaisa, pagtutulong-tulong at yung kasipagan ng tao sa kanyang paghahanap buhay.
Ang buhay dito sa mundo, puno ng hirap at pasakit. Maraming tao ang nagdurusa sa dami at bigat ng problema. Kahirapan, kalamidad, mga sakit na ng bigat, nangangamba ang mga tao. Ama, kami tulungan mo. Tulungan mo kami, Ama.
pinakamalaking problema ngayon, hindi lamang dito sa ating bansa, kundi maging sa buong mundo, ay ang kawalan ng hanap buhay. Itong mga panahon ito ay kailangan talaga yung mga gagabay para tulungan ng mahihirap, tulungan ng walang hanap buhay para sila man ay magkaroon ng pagkakataon na mabuhay ng sagana at maunlad sa buhay na ito.
Tulungan mo kami, Ama. Bigyan ng lakas at pag-asa.
Ang agrikultura ang sagot sa kahirapan. Kaya inaanyayahan namin ng lahat, tulong-tulong tayo. Dito tayo maghanap buhay sa pamamagitan ng agrikultura. Dito sa programang ito, malalaman niyo ang lahat ng ukol sa hanap buhay.
Bigyan ng lakas at pag-asa. Bigyan ng lakas. Linapin mo kami, Ama. Linapin mo.
Inaanyayahan namin po kayo na panuorin nyo itong programa sa Net25, ang unlad, kaagapay sa hanap buhay.
This is Net25, a commercial UHF television station owned and operated by the Eagle Broadcasting Corporation, transmitting on a 50-kilowatt output with NTC permit number BSD-0184-2020 REN, authorizing this station to operate until July 12, 2023. Net25 studios and transmitter are located at number 25 Central Avenue, New Era, Quezon City. Net25 is headed by the following personnel duly licensed by the Professional Regulations Commission and the National Telecommunications Commission. Engineer Armando C. Bonifacio Jr., PECE number 838. Engineer Bernard N. Pangulayan, PECE number 869. Engineer Randy A. Velasco, PECE number 555, with first-class radio telephone operators, Modesto V. De Vera, 96